So we're going to talk about barriers to entry. And when I say barriers, I'm referring to the barriers that you'll face entering a market that make it more difficult for you to enter a market. It's not barriers that completely stop you, but certainly that can make it more difficult. But equally, if you're in business and you have an idea for your product line or service, what are the barriers that exist that prevent others from coming into your marketplace? And I'm going to frame this with this one really important thing. Before I go into what these barriers are, they're pretty generic, but I'm going to go through them real quick. But when I'm going through these, remember this: the higher your barriers, the more money you can charge. The lower the barriers you have, the more people, the easier it is for anyone to come in and do exactly what you do, the less you can charge. Okay. It's kind of, look at this training course, for instance. It's not that difficult for someone to come in, get a couple of cameras or put together a PowerPoint and speak and do a voiceover. It's not hard for people to produce training courses right now or any kind of education on any kind of educational platform. Fact is, barriers to entry, barriers to competitors coming into my market or this market is very, very low. So respectively, my prices have to be a little bit lower too. I can't sit here and charge $50,000 for a course because there are so many other people out there doing the same sort of thing for a lot less. So bear that in mind. Now, if you're looking at these barriers, and I'll make another point very quickly. In terms of getting someone to buy into your idea, and I don't mean buy it as in being a customer, in terms of your distribution network, in terms of any partners you bring on, any salespeople you bring on, if you're paying them, they're going to believe in it. It's easy to pay for someone to believe in your business idea. But to have someone deliver against it on a performance basis where you're expecting them to believe in it, it's very different. It's more difficult, right? Because you've got to deal with the question that comes next. Like, hey, I want you to sell this thing for me and I'll pay you 10% commission. You could be earning $100,000 per month. Okay. So what is it? That's the first question. Okay. Well, how much am I going to get paid? How's the commission structure set up? Okay. How many people, how many customers are there? Well, how am I going to do it? Well, what is that? That's DSSD, right? It's what is it? How am I going to get paid? Is there a market for it? How should I sell it? That's the only reason. These are the questions that they're going to give you straight away as your distributors or anyone selling it for you on a performance only basis. They want to make sure it's really easy for them. And if you're saying, I'm the only cake shop in this entire town and no one else can be a cake shop, now I'm in a position to say to you, look, I'm not going to pay you a salary, but because we're the only cake shop, we can sell all the cakes and everyone has birthdays, right? You know that there's going to be demand for this. You'd be more incentivized then, or that person would be more likely to take on this performance-based position. So this really comes into play here with barriers to entry in regards to, for instance, brand loyalty, which is a customer attachment to an existing product. So what's a good example of that? Well, I mentioned earlier on about Apple, right? How I'm loyal to Apple because even though this is a Samsung board, but I'm loyal to Apple in the sense that my wife has it. My family has Apple products. Everyone in my workspace has an Apple product. All the computers that we use are Apple computers, are Apple laptops. So what does that mean? It means I have a consistency with it. We all use iMessage. We all use the same functionality. I'm just loyal to the brand, even though I don't like the notch on the new iPhone. I was considering and heavily looking into Samsung and understanding the features and benefits of that phone. Still ended up buying Apple because I'm just attached to it. And that's a very, very strong or very high barrier to entry into a market. It just stops new competitors coming in. I mean, it's very expensive for you to get customers. So Samsung makes a lot of money. They can do it. And you've got the various other the cell phone manufacturers out there. But it's not like you and I could just make a cell phone right now and start competing. It's kind of difficult, right? Then you've got economies of scale. Economies of scale is an economics term, but what it basically means is existing firms that benefit from a lower average cost due to their size. And a good example of this would be, say, for instance, Nike or Adidas or Reebok, right? They make sneakers or they make athletic wear, but let's focus on the sneakers. They're making those sneakers at such a low unit price or unit cost that if I were to create sneakers, it would be so expensive. I mean, I'd only be making a couple of thousand at a time. I'd have to do all the research and development, design the thing, get the right kind of rubber. For me to sell $100 sneaker, it probably cost me $99 and I'll be making $1 on each sale. It's very expensive for me. But of course, with those companies, They can literally they're ordering millions of them, tons and tons. I mean, literally shiploads of them at any given time to distribute them out around the world across all their outlets and through all the other retail stores that they have. Their distribution scales are so huge that their economies of scale is so strong in the sense that whatever they buy, they can get it at such a reduced unit cost that their margins on each sale are significantly higher than what mine could be. So that's a barrier to entry too. Geographical barriers. I mean, look, it's not the easiest one, but if you have, I mean, think about gold mining and oil mining, right? If you don't have access to that area where the gold's at or where the oil's at, you can't mine it. So that you're out of the business. You're not going to get in there. But on a let's bring it down to earth for a minute, to home level in terms of our everyday businesses. Look at real estate, for instance. If I'm a property developer, here's a direct example with one of my parking lots. I bought a parking lot next to an airport in South Carolina. The reason I did that was not because it was making so much money. It was actually because no one else could actually make a competing parking lot in the area. Because to have a parking lot, which is a commercial structure, there was no other commercial redevelopment zoned land in the area. You just couldn't go in there and start competing with me because all of that land was actually bought up by other companies and they had structures on them already and they weren't willing to sell. And if they did sell, you'd have to do a lot of work to destroy the building to flatten it out to be a parking lot. The fact is, there was no available land. So that was a massive geographical barrier. I was the only parking lot outside the airport in that location. So that's an example of a barrier. So that, that will either prevent someone from getting in, or if I have or am in position, stops anyone else from coming in to compete with me. Being the first mover is Facebook, Google, as it's defined here, gain a strong position from being the first firm to dominate the market. Now, what I mean by that is Facebook, for example, was the first social media company to really put together and dominate the market to create these social profiles, right? You have lots of other different social media companies now, like Instagram, TikTok, and the various other LinkedIn. But the fact is, they can't directly compete with Facebook. All they can really do is take on a niche and kind of work within the network that Facebook's already dominating. So you can create, like Instagram did, something for pictures and tap into Facebook's network and get a consumer base out of it. Equally, LinkedIn could create the professional variation of that network and tap that niche, but you couldn't really directly hit Facebook. I mean, even Google did try, but Facebook had it. They just dominated the market. And that's an example. Because they have dominated, it's very difficult for new entrants to come in unless, of course, you have a specific niche. So that's a good one. Vertical integration. This is an example of if you have no access to suppliers, you cannot sell your product, right? This goes for most businesses where they're manufacturing something. If you're manufacturing an item, a product, if you're creating it, and you are the only one selling it, no one else can really buy into it. If they'd have to create it themselves, they don't have access to your supply line, and that's important to recognize. And patents is legal, right? So if everything's protected in a certain marketplace, well, think about those cell phones, right? Think about anything where every item there is really heavily patent protected. You can't just go in and copy. If you're going to create something within that market, you're going to have to come up with something brand spanking new, and you're going to have to patent protect, go through that whole legal mumbo jumbo to actually go through that process and be protected. Pretty difficult. So be mindful of these barriers to entry. Now, when I explain these sorts of things and give you examples, I'm trying to give you some big business ideas, and also I'm trying to give you some ideas that are a bit more closer to home. But the fact is, you do have to know this stuff. It's always good to at least recognize it when you're evaluating your own business, because what are we trying to do? We're trying to decide whether or not you're going to create your own product or sell someone else's. And what's the benefit of selling someone else's if they're already successful? Well, they've already done a lot of the work for you. Really, what you're choosing to do is decide whether or not you can distribute correctly. And if you want to distribute correctly within a chosen market, a territory, a geographical location, you want to know who else is out there and what threats you're going to face. And that actually leads me into the next section here, which is Porter's 5 forces. Porter's 5 forces, and this is the end of the diagrams in relation to stuff that I've pulled from university. I don't want to bore you to death, I promise you. Porter's 5 forces directly links to this. This is you deciding on whether or not you're going to enter a market or whether within that market you're going to face new competition. Porter's 5 forces is going to take one layer deeper on this, a look one layer deeper, and go into the micro factors that are going to threaten your business, which is super important, because if you do take this first step, that means you're currently finding distribution partners. You're trying to execute sales. This is you. You're here now. You're trying to distribute. You're trying to get things going, and you got to make sure that the last thing you want to have happen, and this goes back to my statement about how you can pay anyone to believe in you. If you're getting someone to do it on a performance basis, like your distributors, you don't want them coming in a week after signing up with you saying, "Oh, people are pricing us out the market. They're dropping their prices so much, we just can't compete. We're going to stop selling this." You want to make sure that you're prepared for those kind of situations. So Porter's 5 forces is going to help you do that. So I'll see you in the next section.